I never thought I'd need night vision goggles and a drone just to protect a vegetable garden, but here we are. The day Marlene Whitaker, blonde bob, designer dog, HOA clipboard, marched across my field like she was storming Normandy. I knew we were done playing nice. She wasn't alone. 3 people in matching fleece vests followed her like mall cops with measuring tapes, stepping through my kale like they were appraising a crime scene. The worst part? They waved at me like I was the intruder. I stood there with my coffee, watching from the porch like some confused extra in a Western, and thought, you've got to be kidding me. But they weren't. They were serious. Serious enough to plant plastic flags 15 feet inside my fence and act like they were doing me a favor. Where are you watching this video from? Comment below so I can know which country has the scariest Karens. Leave a comment below and subscribe channel, because some of y'all got scarier HOAs than Florida has gators. If you love wild stories that feel too true, packed with justice, chaos, and just the right amount of HOA drama to make your blood pressure twitch, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's tale? It'll make today's look like a warm-up. And the twist coming next? Let's just say even Karen didn't see it coming. Name's Caleb Miles. This land, 22 acres of stubborn soil and better memories, has been in my family since Truman was in office. My grandfather tilled it, my father fought to keep it, and me? I came back to it. After my wife passed, it was the only place that made sense. I built a quiet life here with my daughter Paige. We grow organic vegetables, raise a few chickens, and mostly try to stay out of people's way. Then came Silver Pines, you know the type. A luxury community with artisanal dog parks and more bylaws than common sense. Their backyard butts right up to my eastern fence. At first I welcomed them, waved at their barbecues, even fixed their busted drainage ditch. Then Marlene moved in. Within 6 months, she was HOA president and talking like she'd bought the zip code. It started with letters. Your tractor is visible from our walking path. Your shed roof doesn't match community aesthetics. The kicker? I'm not part of their HOA. Never signed a thing. Never got an invite. I live on separate land, zoned for agriculture, not curated subdivision life. I figured it was a misunderstanding, so I invited Marlene over for coffee, thinking we could clear the air. She showed up with a manila folder and a look that said she'd rather be anywhere else. Barely sipped her drink. Talked for 20 minutes about community standards, while my chickens strutted behind her like they sensed trouble. When I pointed out the property line, she smiled, tapped the folder and said, "Property lines evolve, Mr. Miles, especially when people stop maintaining them." That's when I knew. This wasn't confusion. This was conquest with paperwork. Then came the surveyor's stakes. I was out in town one day getting feed, came back to find a crew in orange vests moving markers around like they were playing Monopoly. One guy looked nervous when I walked up, said the job had been ordered by a client from Silver Pines HOA. The stakes were well into my land, 15 feet by my count. A little shove here and there, and suddenly the official record starts to look blurry. That week, a section of my fence was cut, clean, intentional, and a path was worn right through the grass. I found out later Marlene used it to shave time off her walks to the spa. Turns out community wellness includes trespassing. That night, I installed my first hidden camera in the old pecan tree. I wasn't looking for trouble, but I was done pretending this was normal. What I saw over the next week made my stomach turn. Marlene wasn't just using the path. She was giving tours, pointing at my barn like it was a haunted house, laughing with her friends while they trampled my rosemary bushes. I don't consider myself a hothead. I spent 12 years in the Army Corps of Engineers. I've seen chaos. I've rebuilt cities with my hands and a team of sleep-deprived soldiers. My late wife used to call me aggressively reasonable, but when 5 board members showed up at my porch telling me I had to move my chicken coop because it clashed with community tranquility, something in me snapped into focus. I reminded them, politely but firmly, that my land predates their brochures. Marlene just smiled that tight smile again and said, "We'll see, Mr. Miles. Progress has a way of rewriting history. That night, as I reviewed my drone footage, I watched her husband, real estate lawyer, town council buddy, pointing at my barn with a flashlight and muttering something to the effect of Phase 2. That's when I realized they weren't trying to neighbor me. They were trying to erase me. And I had two choices: sell out like the others, or turn this quiet farm into the most polite battlefield they'd ever trespassed. And buddy, I don't sell, I secure. If you ever want to know how fast a lie can grow legs in a small town, just wait until someone with a clipboard and a grudge whispers it in the school parking lot. 1 week after Marlene's Range Rover trampled my parsley bed, my daughter Paige came home from school red-eyed and trembling. "They said we live on a meth farm," she muttered, her voice the brittle kind that only shows up when childhood takes a hit. Her best friend's mom, formerly my neighborly bake sale partner, had told the PTA I was building military-grade devices in my barn. Apparently, kale, chickens, and a background in engineering is all it takes to make someone suspicious these days. Paige's teacher sent home a note suggesting reduced visibility in extracurriculars, which I guess is code for maybe skip the science fair this year, hillbilly. I didn't know whether to laugh or light a legal fire. But I knew one thing. Someone was trying to turn my daughter into collateral damage. At first I thought it was just gossip. Mean, petty, and cruel, but survivable. Then the county inspector showed up. No call, no warning. Just parked his sedan half in my ditch and started poking around my compost bins like he expected to find bodies. Claimed there were anonymous reports of chemical runoff contaminating the nearby creek. I offered him a coffee, he declined. I offered lab results proving everything I grow is certified organic. He squinted at them like I'd forged them in a basement bunker. He left with a clipboard full of nothing, but not before slapping a bright yellow citation on my gate for potential violations pending review, and just like that, it started. The parade. Zoning officials, animal control, fire code evaluators, each one more apologetic than the last, each one clearly sent to find something, anything, wrong. Not a single fine stuck, but the point wasn't enforcement, it was fatigue. It was death by inspection. Meanwhile, Silver Pine's HOA meetings went from boring wine and wine fests to something more like war councils. I know, because my directional mic picked them up clear as day from their clubhouse deck. They didn't even try to hide it. "He's unstable, he's building traps," one voice said. "We need to document his aggression." Aggression. The word rolled through my speakers like poison in honey. See, I grew up with men who called aggression what it was. Rage, fists, fire. But this was calculated. They wanted to recast me as a threat, not to stop me, but to justify what came next. They weren't after my crops or my fence or even my chickens. They wanted the narrative. Control the story, and you don't need to be right. You just need to sound official enough to make people flinch. That's how they started painting me in invisible ink, the kind only fear could read. Paige started getting invited to fewer parties. The PTA president suddenly had concerns about influence. We'd go into town and people would look up, then away. The feed store clerk told me to hang in there, like I was battling something terminal. And in a way I was. The truth was dying. Slowly, publicly, and I could feel it gasping for air every time another rumor reached our fence line. Even Ray, my neighbor who once helped me fix a busted irrigation valve at midnight, admitted he'd gotten some warnings after refusing an offer to sell part of his orchard. "They're not just looking to expand," he muttered one night, leaning on my post like a man on trial. "They're preparing to replace us." The scariest part wasn't what he said. It was how certain he looked when he said it. That's when I realized we weren't just being pushed, we were being written off. So I dug deeper. Because every war, even the quiet ones, has a playbook. Took me 2 weeks, a few quiet calls to an old friend in zoning, and one late-night bourbon-fueled scroll through county archives. But I found it. Regulation 19.4. Buried in legalese, older than most of the houses in Silver Pines, but freshly activated 3 months ago by a community improvement request. It allows for the reclassification of any agricultural land in disrepair or abandonment, permitting acquisition for development at discounted market value. Sounds innocent until you read the footnotes. Who defines disrepair? The county board, which now had 2 members who golfed with Marlene's husband. Who decides community need? HOA representatives with recognized infrastructure concerns. In other words, they weren't just angling for a buyout. They were laying the legal framework to make me disappear from my own deed. They didn't want to buy my land. They wanted to bury the man who still believed in owning it. And that's where I hit the wall, then pushed through it. Because you don't out-neighbor people like that. You don't reason with architects of erasure. What you do is document and build and prepare. Because if they wanted to make me look unhinged, I'd give them a picture-perfect portrait of calm, strategic, lawful resistance. No fireworks, no fights. Just the kind of plan that makes you look like you were 5 steps ahead the whole time. And if they thought they'd painted me into a corner, well, they forgot one thing. My barn's full of blueprints, and I don't mind drawing new borders. Stay tuned. Because the flags they planted weren't permanent. They were placeholders, and I was just getting started. If you think a little regulation buried in a dusty archive is where this war ends, think again, because in the next part they cross a line they can't uncross, and I stop being the quiet farmer they thought they could bully. You won't believe what I dig up, or how deep their roots really go. So if you're riding this roller coaster with me, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, especially if your HOAs ever tried anything shady. The next chapter, let's just say Fort Miles, is about to rise. You ever hit that point where you realize being polite is just giving your enemy more time to reload? That was me. 2 weeks after finding out about Regulation 19.4, and 6 days after a stranger in khakis accidentally opened my barn door and claimed he was looking for a lost cat. I don't even own a cat. What I do have is 12 years of military engineering experience and a teenage daughter who, when she's not dismantling science fair trophies, has a disturbing talent for drone navigation. We were done playing defense. If they wanted to turn this into a quiet war, they'd better be ready for one fought with weatherproof cameras, disguised motion sensors, and the occasional guilt-free mud geyser. I wasn't farming anymore. I was waging peaceful war with tomatoes as bait. It started simple. 1 camera in the pecan tree, another disguised in an old birdhouse near the cut fence. Then came the GPS tags, tiny things, magnetic, perfect for Range Rovers with too much confidence and not enough respect. I slapped one under Marlene's car during their HOA wellness gala, right between the gift bags and the gluten-free wine. The next morning, I mapped her daily trespass pattern down to the minute. Tuesdays and Thursdays, she shaved 9 minutes off her spa commute by driving across my sorghum rows. Saturdays, she brought friends for a luxury shortcut to the tennis courts. I showed Paige the map and she just nodded. "She's predictable," my daughter said, like a field analyst. That's their weakness. Watching her shift from worried teenager to junior tactician made my heart swell. She inherited her mother's empathy and my engineering grit, a lethal mix, and together we started calling the place what it had become, Fort Miles. Paige helped design the layout. She mapped angles for the cameras, spotted blind spots, and even named our oak tree recon zone, Hawk's Nest. I hadn't seen her light up like that in months. We tested alarms, measured decibel levels, installed a thermal sensor behind the chicken coop. She built a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet. Most dads hope their kids avoid trouble. Mine was helping me blueprint legal land defense like we were prepping for a documentary no one would believe. That's when I knew this wasn't just about boundaries anymore. It was about giving her back control. Because rumor had taken her voice, and now strategy was giving it back. And I'll tell you this, there is no sound more healing than your daughter laughing while camouflaging a trail camera in an old scarecrow's eye socket. If joy had a defense system, that was it. But no plan is complete without a little theatrical flair, so we designed what we called the Mud Bomb Ballet. Biodegradable, non-toxic, activated by pressure plates buried along Marlene's usual shortcut. We even mixed in a bit of safe military-grade dye I had from an old contact, stuff invisible to the eye until hit with the right light. Not harmful, just haunting. The first activation was a Saturday morning, right on cue. Her Range Rover rolled in like it owned the county. Paige sat beside me in the shed, turned monitoring station, eyes on the live feed. "She's crossing into Sector 3, she whispered like it was the most natural thing in the world. I tapped the trigger on my tablet. The nozzles hissed, the spray shot out, and her pristine white vehicle instantly looked like it had lost a fight with a haunted swamp. She slammed the brakes, screamed, reversed into another burst. It was, without exaggeration, the most satisfying ballet I've ever watched. And I've seen Nutcracker twice, with my mother-in-law. She peeled off, mud-streaked and fuming, while Paige high-fived me so hard my wrist cracked. But it wasn't just the Range Rover that got tagged. The dye, impossible to scrub completely, left faint residue on her garage door, driveway, and spa lot. Our cameras caught her scrubbing at it days later like Lady Macbeth in yoga pants. And the best part? She didn't call the cops. She didn't call anyone. Because admitting it meant confessing she'd been trespassing. That's the thing about people who weaponize rules. They never think they'll trip over one. You don't have to hit back when you can outthink your enemy until they run into themselves. And trust me, Marlene had just crashed headfirst into her own entitlement. But as satisfying as that was, something deeper was brewing, the kind of secret no amount of mud could hide. And what we found next? It changed everything we thought we knew about why they wanted our land. Stick around, because Fort Miles was only the beginning. I've seen a lot in my time. Typhoons in Kandahar, a collapsed bridge in Missouri, even a goat that somehow survived a lightning strike. But nothing quite prepared me for the sight of 4 luxury SUVs creeping across my pasture under the cover of darkness like a group of pampered warlords on a misguided mission. It was just after midnight, and Paige had already noted something odd on the drone. "Dad," she said, peering at the monitor, "why is there an excavator behind a BMW with Christmas lights?" Turns out that wasn't a Christmas light. It was a construction spotlight. They didn't just come to trespass, they came to build. Or rather, to destroy. That's when I flipped the master switch. Operation Nightfall was officially a go. The first move was the floodlights. We'd rigged them to cover every corner of the eastern field. Bright enough to stun a deer, let alone a group of HOA vigilantes trying to redraw property lines with landscaping flags and legal delusions. As soon as the lights blasted on, the caravan stopped cold. One driver hit the brakes so hard, their Lexus fishtailed into a hay bale I'd been meaning to move since April. Marlene stood frozen near the excavator, her sequined jacket catching the light like a disco ball of entitlement. I activated the loudspeaker. "You are trespassing on private property. Security systems are active and recording. Retreat immediately." The silence that followed was delicious. Until it wasn't. Because Marlene didn't flinch. She pointed forward like she was directing troops across enemy lines. The excavator revved up with the kind of groan that tells you it's not here to prune roses. That's when I escalated to Phase 2, fog and bang. Paige counted us in like it was a high school play. 3, 2, 1. The air filled with thick, theatrical fog. Harmless, but enough to turn their vision into a fever dream. Simultaneously, our acoustic deterrents fired up. Sharp bursts of sound that echoed across the property like digital thunderclaps. They weren't loud enough to hurt anyone, but they sure made the HOA board rethink their Friday night plans. The pink spotted excavator, yes, still faintly dyed from our last prank, jerked to a halt as the driver bailed like a kid caught joyriding. They came in silence, but left in sirens. One of the SUVs got stuck in a divot. Another reversed so fast it clipped a garden post and sent a decorative gnome flying into my compost pile. Through the swirling fog and flood-like maze, it looked like a retreat scene from a bad war movie sponsored by a country club. Marlene screamed something about community rights, which, given the context, sounded more like, "We deserve your land because our lawn is fancier." It was chaos, Glorious self-inflicted chaos. Paige was filming everything from the monitoring shed, giggling between updates like a junior news anchor. And in tonight's headlines, HOA members humiliated by tomatoes and tech. I've seen tactical retreats, but this one had the elegance of cats falling into a bathtub. By the time they reached the property line, one Range Rover had lost a mirror, the excavator was abandoned mid-field, and Marlene looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. But the best was yet to come. Sheriff Collins arrived 10 minutes later, headlights flashing, uniform slightly wrinkled like he'd been pulled from a nap. He stepped out, took one long look at the mess, and muttered, "What in God's name happened here, Caleb?" I led him to the control shed, showed him the live feed, the saved footage, the property markers, the flags, the excavator halfway into my squash patch. He watched in stunned silence, occasionally rubbing his temples like he was calculating how many reports he'd need to file. When Marlene tried to approach him, waving a folder full of what I assume were HOA minutes and motivational quotes, he held up a hand like a preschool crosswalk. "Ma'am," he said, "the only thing you're building tonight is a criminal case." That's when I knew. The narrative had finally shifted. They called me unstable. That night I just proved I was unshakable. But as satisfying as that night was, I knew something they didn't. This wasn't over. That was just their opening act, their clumsy blitz. The truth? They'd been trying to push me out with fines and fake reports, but now, after failing in the shadows, they'd come out into the light. And I had the footage, the flags, and a polka-dotted excavator to prove it. The real story wasn't the mud or the lights. It was that the HOA had just shown their hand, and if they thought that was their power play, they hadn't seen what we'd unearthed underneath the surface of this land. Stick with me, because next, we uncover the reason they want this property so badly. And it's not tennis courts. It's something that smells a whole lot more like money. If you thought a midnight HOA raid was rock bottom, think again, because next time we dig up the real reason they're after my land. And let's just say, it's not about chickens or tennis courts. What we uncover, it'll flip the whole game. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, especially if your HOA's ever tried something sneaky in the dark. The next chapter? Follow the money. And trust me, you're gonna want a front row seat. You ever get the feeling the real battle isn't happening above ground, it's happening under your boots? That's where I was a week after the HOA's midnight meltdown. Sure, they left behind a pink-dyed excavator, 4 tire tracks through my zucchini, and the distinct odor of scorched entitlement. But deep down, I could feel it. This wasn't over. It was the calm before something slicker, colder, greedier, and I was right. Because Paige, my daughter/intel officer, found something buried in the back of my grandfather's deed. A clause so old it smelled like bourbon and pipe smoke, but still binding. Full mineral rights, retained and indivisible. That meant whatever was under this land, oil, gas, gold, ghosts, belonged to us. Not them, us. And now, I knew what they were really after. Paige squinted at the paper, then at me. "They don't want your garden, Dad. They want what's under it." Sharp kid. So we dug. Figuratively. I spent 3 days cross-referencing permit filings, HOA board member names, and land transfers that all smelled like a backroom handshake. That's when Garrett Whitaker, Marlene's lawyer husband, popped up on filings for a company called Crescent Ridge Energy. Guess what Crescent Ridge was doing? Acquiring mineral rights. Quietly, strategically, right after folks decided to sell. I called Ray Martinez, my neighbor who gave up 10 acres after equipment sabotage got too expensive to fix. He'd heard of them too. So had Ellen Reeves, the orchard owner whose apples died overnight after a random pesticide drift. The pattern was tighter than HOA pants at a 4th of July BBQ, and suddenly it all clicked. The HOA wasn't protecting anything, it was camouflaging a land grab. Now, I'm not one to accuse without proof, so Paige and I did what the HOA never expected. We got organized. Spreadsheets, maps, timelines, every suspicious inspection, every mysteriously withdrawn permit, every landowner who got squeezed just enough to sell. We printed 20 copies, laminated 3, and dropped them off with a few sympathetic folks around town. The next week, we hosted a meeting under the oak tree. It was the most coordinated thing I'd seen since my deployment in Ramadi. Farmers, shopkeepers, one retired chemistry teacher with a clipboard and a grudge, all with the same story: weird citations, water problems, pressure to sell. Paige handed out highlighters. I handed out facts. By sundown, it wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. We weren't crazy. We were targets. And targets with receipts are dangerous. The town council hearing was standing room only. Sheriff Collins was there, arms crossed like he'd seen a ghost. Marlene and Garrett were front and center, whispering like villains at intermission. I walked to the podium with a folder thick enough to stop a bullet and opened with one line: "This isn't about code violations, it's about control." From there, I dropped the hammer. Mineral survey maps filed 3 months before HOA complaints, legal connections between Garrett and Crescent Ridge, testimonies from 3 separate farmers forced off their land. I showed how my fence, my soil, my life had been marked for acquisition by a development masked as a community. They weren't after land, they were after the veins beneath it. The room went dead silent. The kind of silence that feels like gravity itself is holding its breath. Garrett stood up, tried to object. Councilwoman Ruth gave him a look that could defrost concrete. "You've had your turn," she said. "Let him finish." I did. I ended with the mineral clause, held it up like a verdict. "This isn't just greed," I said. "It's systemic manipulation dressed up in lawn care and bylaws." The crowd didn't cheer. They nodded. The kind of nod that says, "Finally." That night, the council froze all HOA expansions and opened a formal investigation into Crescent Ridge. Marlene left without her clipboard. Garrett didn't look back. But the truth? We weren't done. We just exposed the roots. What was coming next? That was the wildfire. And it was about to spread. Victory doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like a town hall meeting ending in dead silence, a pink-spotted excavator sitting in a field like a shame monument, and a teenage girl standing next to you with a clipboard and more conviction than the entire HOA combined. 2 weeks after the council hearing, things began to shift. Quiet at first, like the hush right before a thunderstorm hits. But this time the thunder came for them. The town council launched a formal investigation into Crescent Ridge Energy, suspended all HOA legal filings, and moved to update zoning laws to include independent land audits. Garrett Whitaker resigned from his legal firm before he could be fired. And Marlene? She got booted from the HOA presidency in a 92% vote. The other 8% probably hadn't heard yet, or were busy scrubbing Range Rovers. Word spread fast. Faster than gossip at the feed store. Other towns started reviewing their mineral rights policies. State officials got involved. Turns out, this wasn't just a local scheme. It was a pilot program. A soft test for something bigger. But not anymore, because a farmer and his daughter with an old surveillance drone and a stack of receipts pulled the curtain back. And folks noticed. Justice didn't knock, Paige joked one night. It drove in reverse with muddy tires and a camera crew. We laughed. And for the first time in months, it wasn't the tired laugh of survival. It was something brighter, fuller. The kind of laugh that comes when you realize the land they tried to erase just made the county stronger. I turned part of the East Field into a small farmer's market, aptly named Miles Market. It started with 5 vendors. Ray's tomatoes, Ellen's now thriving apple cider, and one very colorful centerpiece, the excavator. Still faintly pink, still wonderfully useless, now surrounded by local kids posing for pictures. We stuck a sign on it that read, "Trespassers will be painted Page had the idea to add QR codes linking to the news article that broke the story wide. Tourists came. Locals smiled. The same field they'd tried to hijack had become a landmark. They wanted a tennis court. What they got was a movement. A reminder that quiet resistance, done right, done legally, done with community, can outlast even the greediest plans in khaki. And here's the thing. I didn't set out to be some folk hero. I just wanted to protect what was mine. That farm wasn't just dirt and fencing. It was my father's lungs, my mother's heartbeat, and now my daughter's future. Every shovel of soil held stories. Every fence post had a memory stapled to it. I wasn't defending property. I was defending the archive of my family. And when you frame it like that, suddenly the mud traps and motion sensors don't feel extreme. They feel like legacy insurance. Funny, isn't it? How sometimes the smallest places have the biggest roots. The day I gave my final town speech, Paige stood beside me. I told them everything I've told you. The good, the ugly, the absurdly HOA. I showed them how quiet bullying becomes public shame, how fake fines collapse under real truth, and how standing your ground doesn't just save your land, it fertilizes a movement. When we left, there wasn't applause, there was nodding, eye contact, handshakes that meant something, the kind of energy that doesn't explode, it spreads, like good soil after the rain. So, if you're watching this and someone's planting flags where they don't belong, just remember, you don't need to yell to be heard. Sometimes, you just need to stand still long enough for everyone else to realize who's been moving the lines. You know, when this all started, I thought I was just defending a fence line, but it was never about fences. It was about what they were trying to take without ever asking. My story, my daughter's peace, my family's roots. And somehow, by holding on, by standing our ground, with strategy instead of shouting, we did more than keep the land. We gave the whole town something to believe in again. Because here's the truth they never counted on. They thought they were just pressuring a farmer. What they found was a father, an engineer, a quiet man who didn't need a spotlight, just a reason. And when you give someone like that a reason, you better hope your survey stakes are refundable. This story isn't just mine, it's every person who's ever been underestimated, outnumbered, or outlawyered, but chose to push back with brains and backbone. It's about how justice isn't always loud, but when it lands, it echoes. So if you felt something while listening, if it reminded you of someone who stood their ground, or made you think about the invisible ways power tries to move borders, leave a comment below and tell me what resonated with you. Share your stories. Speak your truth. Hit that like button if you believe in smart resistance, in community over control, in land that tells a legacy instead of just turning a profit. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel, because next time we're taking on an HOA president who accidentally built a solar grid on someone else's ranch. Spoiler alert, the rancher buys the utility company. You're not going to want to miss it. Thanks for listening. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay exactly where you are.